Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, fill in the blank, and crazy martinis for conservatives today, although the crazy one's pretty darn bad, I must say. But we'll get to all that in just a moment. Jim, we start with the good martini, and it's good in the sense that this has been revealed. The actual incident in question certainly is not good. We know that Democrats are very excited about winning a statewide race in Texas, and you know how that usually turns out. But there are some recent polls showing that Democratic Congressman Beto O'Rourke is within striking distance of Ted Cruz. In fact, there was one poll earlier this week that showed it a 1-point race. It's been pretty much lavish coverage from certainly the national media, but even a lot of the state coverage of O'Rourke. But now the Houston Chronicle has done actual reporting, which I know is unpopular in a lot of media circles these days, but we applaud them for it. And they're talking about an incident we knew about, which was Beto O'Rourke being charged with driving while intoxicated back in September of 1998, so 20 years ago. But there's more details now, which add a little bit more concern to the story. Quote, although the arrest has been public knowledge, police reports of the September 1998 incident when the Democratic Senate candidate had just turned 26 showed that it was a more serious threat to public safety than has previously been reported. State and local police reports obtained by the Chronicle and Express News show that O'Rourke was driving drunk at what a witness called a high rate of speed in a 75-mile-per-hour zone on Interstate 10, about a mile from the New Mexico border. He lost control and hit a truck, sending his car careening across the center median into oncoming lanes. The witness, who stopped at the scene, later told police that O'Rourke had tried to drive away from the scene, and additional details in the report include the fact that he blew higher than a .13 on the breathalyzer. So, Jim, those of us who remember 2000 and the 11th hour last weekend of the campaign revelation that George W. Bush had a DUI back in, I think, September of 1976. And that may have led to some problems for them in Florida. Who knows for sure? Some folks are going to argue that this is really old news. Others will argue that it speaks to O'Rourke's recklessness in a dicey situation.
Yeah, so my first thought, Greg, was very much like you said, look, any state that elects George W. Bush governor twice and then votes for him for president twice is probably not going to react all that strongly to a DUI from many years ago. But then I started thinking about it more, and I read about this in the Morning Jolt today. So Beto O'Rourke has been getting just these glowing profiles from the New York Times, the Washington Post, Rolling Stone, just going out there and just glowing, the Texas Kennedy, right? And just, TV shows. I mean, he is getting almost Obama-esque levels of coverage. So I read through a couple of them, but I went back and decided to really look at probably one of the longest and most in-detail ones by Texas Monthly. They put him on the cover. It's worth noting they did two covers that month. One had O'Rourke on the cover and one had Ted Cruz on the cover. So you can't say they were playing favorites. I would note, though, that 4 years ago, Texas Monthly was the magazine that put the three Texas Democrats, Julian Castro and his twin brother on the cover, and Wendy Davis, and she was holding up her pink sneakers. And the cover, caption was, "Game on! Texas Democrats are ready to..." And those of us, we're kind of skeptical of the idea that she was really the figure who was running on abortion of all topics that was suddenly going to lead the great Democratic comeback in Texas. And she did terribly on Election Day. She actually kind of ran that embarrassing ad against Greg Abbott, kind of suggesting that he was at fault for his own paralysis. I mean, she didn't just lose. I would argue she embarrassed herself. And I don't believe, you look back at the exact figures, but I don't think any Democrat did better than 39% in any statewide race in 2014. So is Beto O'Rourke going to do better than Wendy Davis? Yeah, sure. That's not that high a bar to clear. The question is he going to win? Yeah, there was that one poll that had him within 1 point, but most of the polling has it pretty close. I would note that Greg Abbott is cruising to re-election, up by like 19 points. So, this question of what is going on here? And you read through that profile, and I guess I just kind of had this feeling, Greg, that there was something more to Beto O'Rourke. He does not have a great rags to riches story. He didn't grow up in poverty, child of immigrants, any of that kind of stuff. Bright kid, went to Columbia, was in a punk rock band that every profile seems to feel the need to mention. Didn't do much, a bunch of dead-end jobs up in New York City after Columbia, which is, no crime. None of this is say, oh, Beto O'Rourke is a terrible human being because of this stuff. Just, my point is that how kind of average and ordinary it is. Moves back to El Paso, starts a software company that's pretty successful. I mean, not a, giant in the industry, but, it's success. Makes a good living, gets involved in local businesses, decides to run for city council. Some success in the city council, by no means a revolutionary renaissance of the city. Promoted this big redevelopment project that really only got about half completed, but this is during the time of the Great Recession. They had a hard time getting money, et cetera, et cetera. So he's a perfectly fine city councilman and decides to take on Sylvester Reyes, who is a Texas Democrat, kind of conservative by national Democrat standards, but I don't think you'd say he's, a diehard lefty or diehard conservative, Joe Manchin type. Reyes kind of took it for granted, was not doing a heck of a lot of the, going out on the stump, had one or two scandals attached to him about campaign spending, and O'Rourke very narrowly beats him in the primary. That was 2012. And quick, up until he started running for Senate, Greg, how much had you heard of Beto O'Rourke in Congress since 2012?
Not much, except that time he took the road trip with Will Hurd. That's it.
There you go, right? I mean, basically, he was, kind of standard issue Texas Democrat. And I'm reading through this profile, Greg, and he didn't serve in the military. He didn't, no exceptional stories of him, remarkable courage, facing down a burglar, rescuing a cat from a tree. Like you kind of, usually when you see somebody, my goodness, look at this person. There's something kind of extreme. For contrast, Ted Cruz, before he ran for Senate, had tried 9 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. Won 5 of them, right? I don't think anybody dispute. Ted Cruz was a darn good lawyer. Beto O'Rourke is just kind of this guy. Now, is he a good campaigner? Heck yes. And clearly everybody goes down there, falls in love with him. But I said, he doesn't really have the kind of resume that would usually generate this, oh my God, it's Lone Star Jesus sort of reaction. And so somebody on Twitter was like, well, look, I guess we'll just have to, discuss his positions and his integrity. And that's where the DUI comes in hand. Because, the DUI has been mentioned. That 8,500 word Texas Monthly profile I mentioned it for half a sentence. Most people figured, okay, college kid or post-college kid, goes out, gets drink, fails a breathalyzer test, Well, no, that was a terrible accident. He could have killed himself, could have killed somebody else. That was a fairly serious issue. And the claim from the witness, he was attempting to leave the scene of an accident. This is the sort of thing where all of a sudden maybe we can't tout Beto O'Rourke's vaunted integrity as a reason for that. And then you get into his positions. And as I said, he's a standard issue Democrat in Texas, one of the most Republican states of the country. We'll see how it shakes out. But I think it's safe to say that the excitement and the enthusiasm amongst those who go to cover Beto O'Rourke is much higher than I think you'll actually see among state voters. And one last thing I'll just point out, Greg, because I thought about this really long and hard. Why were so many people from all across the country, so many correspondents, so many journalists going there? And I came to the conclusion. Do you know why Beto O'Rourke gets really great press, Greg?
Why?
Everybody loves visiting Texas. The food is good. People are friendly. Everybody else in the country's got a miserable winter. You get to go down to kind of warmer weather. So think about it. You get to go down to Texas. You eat tacos. You drink Shiner Bock. You write it all off as a business expense. No, I've never done this, but Lord knows I'm tempted. But when you come home, you can't say, hey, he's a really good guy. He's going to do better than Wendy Davis, but he doesn't have a chance against him. Your editor's not going to sign off on that. That's the last business. That's the last time they're sending you out and covering your expenses to spend winter in Texas. So you have to write, this guy is the next great hope. This guy is, the amazing thing. You have to come out and say, this guy's amazing. Because this is the next big thing in Democratic politics, because otherwise you just ate a lot of tacos.
Good tweet also from Jeff, goes by Esoteric CD on Twitter. He works with Decision Desk HQ. He is co-host of the Political Beats podcast. Also, he says, I remember when Mitt Romney allegedly gave a schoolmate a haircut at age 15, and it was a window into his monstrous soul. An adult Beto O'Rourke nearly kills people in a depravedly negligent drunk driving accident and then tries to flee the scene. But now the response is, but people grow. So... consistency.
So I had put, this is the last thing. So I had put out a poll on Twitter, and I should have done this before I posted all my stuff about my piece on Beto O'Rourke today. Many people, I suspect, have the perception that Beto O'Rourke is Latino and that he is a veteran. Now, Beto O'Rourke has worked extensively on veterans issues during his 5 years or so in Congress. He's been very critical of his local VA office. I give him all the credit in the world for that. But I don't know if it's because of his posture, right? His appearance. People think he served in the military. He just seems like the kind of guy who would be a veteran, except he isn't. And the second thing is that Beto O'Rourke is about as Latino as I am. The O'Rourkes are Irish American. Beto is a short for Alberto, and yet you keep seeing headlines like Beto O'Rourke is inspiring Texas Latinos. And just kind of these little headlines, these little coverage, it leaves the impression that he's part of a group that he doesn't, that he is not, a part of. And I just kind of have this, this is one of those great impressions where, people will say Ted Cruz is an actual Cuban-American child of immigrants. And he doesn't get, covered that way. Whereas Beto O'Rourke is the fourth generation Texan of Irish heritage, and he's getting treated as if he's the hero of Latino Democrats.
Well, we hope he doesn't win, but if he does, and Elizabeth Warren gets reelected, they can start the fictional Heritage Caucus.
Somewhere there's a Rachel Dolezal joke in there, Greg, but I'm not going to touch it yet.
Terrorist strikes again in London.
Putin's nuclear ambitions are raising proliferation questions.
There's a new military strategy in the South China Sea.
Global events happening now mean the demand for national security professionals will spike over the next decade. America's security will depend on individuals highly trained in strategy, disruption management, and decision-making. The Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security prepares students for a world full of instability. Students in our state-of-the-art school, just 3 blocks from the White House, take courses in counterterrorism, U.S. nuclear weapons, Russian politics, and statecraft. Our graduates are well prepared for sought-after security positions in government and private sectors. Even more unique are the multi-full-ride scholarships provided by donors investing in future leaders. For more information, go to dmgs.org/radio. For a career in organizations like Marriott and Boeing, the CIA, or FBI, and a possible full-ride scholarship, go immediately to dmgs.org/radio. That's dmgs.org/radio.
All right, Jim, let's go to our fill-in-the-blank martini now. There's probably some interesting aspects that people will find good and bad and maybe even a little bit crazy in here. But one of the interesting things that's gone on during this whole John McCain week is who's getting snubbed from the various services. President Trump is on the list, to absolutely no one's surprise. To quite a few people's surprise, Sarah Palin is not invited to any of these services. And now we find out from National Review alum Eliana Johnson, who now writes over at Politico, that some other names that maybe a lot of folks wouldn't have expected to be snubbed are also on the outs when it comes to the funeral services. John McCain's funeral will spotlight some of the late senator's political rivals, but some of his closest campaign aides are being excluded from the proceedings. 3 of the most prominent members of his 2008 presidential campaign manager Steve Schmidt, senior advisor Nicolle Wallace, and longtime strategist John Weaver, were not invited to any of McCain's services, according to 3 people familiar with the guest list. Why, you might ask? Well, in the wake of the 2008 campaign, Schmidt and Wallace were publicly critical of McCain's decision to tap Sarah Palin, though Schmidt played a role in it himself. Both cooperated with Mark Halperin and John Heilman on their 2009 book Game Change, which chronicled Palin's tumultuous time on the campaign trail and helped catapult Schmidt and Wallace to national fame after HBO turned the movie into a book. McCain viewed their lack of discretion as a betrayal, and it led to a 6-year estrangement with Schmidt. The senator said publicly at the time he would not see the movie, calling the book completely biased. The money quote, as you call it, Jim, from this story is, quote, "That cathedral will be filled with people who stabbed McCain in the front. Schmidt and Nicolle and Weaver stabbed him in the back, and you can't find a single McCain loyalist who will say different or feels different." So what do you make of all this?
Greg, you and I, before we started taping, were debating, was this the good martini? Was this the bad martini? Was this the crazy martini? Folks, score it as you like, but I'm going to put this down as the delicious martini. Because here's, it is rather strange, right? I mean, like George W. Bush and John McCain had, that South Carolina primary in 2000. They went at it hammer and tongs. There were a lot of people who felt that George W. Bush had, if not crossed the line, then gone right up to the line in what was seen as acceptable or ethical attacks, even in a hard-fought campaign. And, of course, then there's Barack Obama. Since the passing of John McCain, you and I have discussed about how a good portion of people, both on and off the Obama campaign, but allied with his cause in 2008, basically were comfortable portraying him as crazy grandpa warmonger for the better part of 2007, 2008. So it's very intriguing that McCain, my understanding is that all the details of this funeral have been planned and in the works for quite some time. We knew this was not a ailment that Senator McCain was likely to overcome, and everything wanted things in accordance with his wishes, meaning that if John McCain very strongly believed that Sarah Palin should be invited, presumably he would say so. It's a little surprising. I don't think I've ever seen Palin say anything all that critical of McCain. I think it's very safe to say that their politics diverged after that 2008 campaign. And I have no doubt that a whole bunch of Sarah Palin fans don't like John McCain one bit. But at least as far as I've seen, maybe I missed something, Palin's comments were always, I salute his service. I'll always be, consider he and Cindy friends, et cetera, et cetera. Now, for these three aides, I think what really stands out here is that every presidential campaign has its own internal chaos. If you talk to people who work on them, of course they have internal disagreements. Of course they have finger pointing. Of course they have ideas that don't work and embarrassing moments and moments where it all seems lost. I mean, this is kind of, this happens. But it's really interesting that Game Change, first of all, the film focused entirely on McCain and Palin. The stories that come out of this, of a campaign showcase, hey, everybody's got it, but it was really seen, the McCain campaign was seen as some sort of runaway train of a disaster, of all kind of stuff, much more than any other one, but also the people on the McCain campaign, and in particular Schmidt, Wallace, and Weaver, became stars after that campaign, mostly by saying what a disaster it was, how craven McCain had been, what a giant mistake it was to pick Palin. And I can't help but get the feeling that this was McCain saying, look, hey, I raised you up, right? I brought you up on this, and you betrayed my trust. So, as I said, maybe that is the difference, that, Bush and Obama stabbed him from the front. But these folks, for interesting contrast, did anybody from the Romney campaign become a star by talking about what a terrible choice it was to pick Paul Ryan? First, I don't think it was a terrible choice to pick Paul Ryan. But two, we haven't really seen anything from Robbie Mook suddenly saying, oh, if only they'd listened to me, type stories about the Hillary Clinton campaign. Bob Shrum wrote his memoirs and had some unflattering, some not so great moments on the John Kerry campaign, but that was kind of at the end of Bob Shrum's career. I went back and I looked. Andrew Young was the guy who John Edwards tried to take the fall for the Riel Hunter thing. He's not even working in politics anymore, as far as anyone knows. It really was a unique circumstance that the McCain campaign staffers afterwards got to say, this was a disaster. It would have been terrible for the country if we had won. The Democrats were right all along. And lo and behold, Greg, they all got MSNBC contracts. What are the odds?
That's exactly right. And of course, Schmidt just recently announced he either is a Democrat or is supporting Democrats, and so the Republican Party can burn to the ground and rebuild it up. He's one of these people that's so never Trump, he can't support anything that's conservative just because it might be associated with this administration. He's the virtuous one, the one who knows what it truly is to be a true Republican, a true conservative, and everybody else is a colossal sellout. Not that there aren't quite a few of those as well, but he just built himself up on this pillar. I haven't seen Wallace as much, but just the fact of how they parlayed the 2008 campaign into their careers suggests that it doesn't come as a huge shock that McCain decided to do this.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you want to work on a presidential campaign and you want to be entrusted in that inner circle, right, the top level of the campaign, you're going to see some ugly stuff, right? You're going to see fights. You're going to see disputes between the candidate and the staff, and maybe complications with the candidate's family, and all this sort of thing. This is kind of normal in politics. It's saying you don't want to see how the sausage gets made. And by being in that inner circle, you're being trusted with something. Look, we're going to show you what's really going on behind the curtain, but you can't tell anybody, or at least not until everybody's in retirement, right? And these three didn't do that. So now the real question is, if you betrayed that trust, and the candidate can't trust you, why should you be invited to the funeral? Now, I will point out, Greg, if there's anybody who listens to this podcast and can't stand me and thinks I'm wrong about everything and just fumes and all kind of stuff, I'm not going to turn down anybody showing up to my funeral as long as they're sad, Greg. That's kind of, if you're going there and you're breaking out the party hats, the kazoos, hey, Jim's dead, yay, don't show up. But if you're genuinely sad and you and I have had disagreements, yeah, come on, go ahead. I'm not expecting a packed house anyway. So that would be my philosophy. But if it's McCain's funeral, he and his family are free to, set it up the way they like.
Yeah, they can make the list however they want. It would be good to see, reconciliation and forgiveness, and it looks like that may have happened with McCain and Schmidt based on what Eliana reported. But yeah, politics is strange business for sure. All right, Jim, let's move to our Crazy Martini now. And this is a story we first started talking about nearly a year ago now, and that's the Me Too movement and first the New York Times piece, and then subsequently the jaw-dropping Ronan Farrow series in The New Yorker. And now we're learning more about why that story came out in The New Yorker instead of NBC. This is from The New York Times. In October, when Ronan Farrow published his first article in The New Yorker on the alleged transgressions of Harvey Weinstein, people in the media and entertainment industries wondered how NBC had missed the story. After all, Mr. Farrow had spent months gathering material on the mogul when he was with NBC News. Now a producer who worked closely with Mr. Farrow has accused the network of putting a stop to the reporting, saying the order came from the very highest levels of NBC. Rich McHugh, the producer who recently left his job in the investigative unit of NBC News, is the first person affiliated with NBC to publicly charge that the network impeded his and Mr. Farrow's efforts to nail down the story of Mr. Weinstein's alleged sexual misconduct. He called the network's handling of the matter a massive breach of journalistic integrity. NBC denied his characterization on Thursday, saying Mr. Farrow's work was not broadcast ready when the reporter decided to take his reporting to The New Yorker. Nearly 2 months after he stopped working on the story for NBC, Mr. Farrow published the first in his series of articles on Mr. Weinstein. McHugh described NBC as resistant throughout the 8-month reporting process, and he said, quote, 3 days before Ronan and I were going to head to L.A. to interview a woman with a credible rape allegation against Harvey Weinstein, I was ordered to stop, not to interview this woman, Mr. McHugh said, and to stand down on the story altogether. So, Jim, NBC can issue the general denials, but when you get to allegations that specific, I think they're going to have to do a lot more work than just issue a blanket statement here.
Greg, there's a fairly simple explanation. If you're conspiracy-minded and or cynical and you don't want to give people the benefit of the doubt. And luckily enough, all three apply to me, Greg. So what was the other giant scandal that came out not too long after the Harvey Weinstein scandal? It was Matt Lauer over the Today Show, right? Yeah. The horrible things he was accused of doing. And there were various accounts of that said that Matt Lauer, for some strange reason, never had an interest in stories about sexual harassment or allegations or high-profile celebrity scandals or something like that. And a lot of people looked at that and said, was he going to protect himself from future charges of hypocrisy or something like that? Look, nothing in this particular story says NBC News spiked or was extraordinarily reluctant to run Ronan Farrow stories about Harvey Weinstein because of Matt Lauer. But it does kind of raise the question of if NBC News was the kind of environment where Matt Lauer's behavior was an open secret and everybody knew what kind of guy he was and everybody knew what kind of stuff he was doing with his female staffers and things like that, that would they then suddenly say, we can't be leading the charge on a giant sexual harassment story? That if people start talking about what Harvey Weinstein's doing, they'll start talking about what Matt Lauer is doing? Again, a theory. My suspicion is that over time, all of this will come out someday. But man, if you're an NBC News reporter, Greg, some of the biggest stories of the day are going on in the next cubicle. This is one of those things usually I say ironically, thank goodness it's Friday, Greg, but turns out to actually be Friday today.
Yeah. Congratulations. We made it to Friday. We get a 3-day weekend. We'll not be here on Monday. We'll be back on Tuesday. Happy Labor Day, everyone. And Jim, enjoy the break. Then we'll only have a 4-day week to get to Friday. Pretty nice.
Sounds good, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And be sure to tune in again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.